Good evening and welcome to the final session of papers for the day before we go into the round table. What's interesting about this session, Legacies of Wilderness, is that we've had so far today numerous perspectives from the 19th century, from the point of view of the settler cultures. And our first speaker for this afternoon session is actually going to be representing a different perspective, and that's the perspective of the contemporary artist, the perspective of Indigenous experience, and the perspective of now as well as history. So would you please join me in welcoming Christopher Pease.
A couple of things. You'll have to excuse my voice. I've just getting over a cold, so my voice is a little bit funny. And the second thing is I've lost my good glasses, so I've got some cheap glasses here. I'd like to just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of Whadjuk land. I'm going to show some images of early colonial work of Western Australia, and in conjunction to that, my work, a lot of my practice actually comes from taking this imagery. So there's going to be a lot of imagery from works that I've done in response to these works. So I guess we'll get started. The opening shot here is John Sykes, and it's one of the first lithographs that were done of the southwest of Western Australia. So 1798 this was completed, and the title is A Deserted Indian Village. And note the interpretation of the eucalyptus tree into something that looks a lot like an oak tree. Yeah, and you'll see a lot of that as I go through. Okay, this is a work that I did called Noongar Budja, or Noongar Land. It's an interpretation of a William Westall work that was completed in 1801. He was on board the Investigator with Matthew Flinders. And the interpretation of land in these early years is very different to that of Noongar people, obviously. The primary focus of the colony was to procure suitable land for agriculture and settlement. So the land was surveyed and interpreted via the sciences, mathematics, hydrology, geology, and then divided up into individual families. Most of the land was then fenced off and cleared in the southwest. And this is at complete odds with the traditional beliefs of Noongar people, who used extensive trade routes through the area of the southwest and moved according to the seasons. And private land ownership was a completely foreign concept traditionally to Noongar people. And this, on the left panel, I'm using balga resin, by the way, balga resin or grass tree resin or black boy resin, if you want to call it that. So I'm using, in a sense, the blood of a plant growing on the land to create another image or an alternative perspective to landscape, whereas the one on the right uses three perspective, a tool. Artists have a tool called perspective to create the image of a landscape. I used the blood of a plant to create it. And there's also a little Sir John Tenniel rabbit from Alice in Wonderland there. And he's holding a science book, and there's a whole stack of hydrology books and mathematics books on the left-hand side there that you can see. The Sir John Tenniel rabbit was used extensively through a lot of my work, and you'll see more of that in a bit. This is, in 1826, the Astrolabe landed or took anchor in King George Sound, and one of the artists on board was Louis de Saint-Son, and the ship was the Astrolabe. He was captained by Captain de Urville, and they were there for several months. And this is one of the earliest aquatints from that period. This is a copy of that. This is an interpretation of that after Louis de Sanson, and has again the Sir John Tenniel rabbit, white rabbit in there, and he's using a theodolite in this instance, which was a tool that used mathematics to interpret land and to survey the land. And this is another image that shows Minang people cooperating with the people from the astrolabe, taking fresh water from a freshwater spring into a canvas funnel, and then funneling it onto barrels for the longboat to take back to the ship. And there was friendly and cooperative relationships at this time between the French and the Minang people. This is a work that's an interpretation of that. And in the diagram in the middle is that's something that's used in hydrology, and it shows all the bed configurations and planeforms. That's the basics of river formation and hydrology, which kind of gets to the heart of differences in belief, and it also is a reference to the Noongar belief of the way that rivers were created, and that was through the Woggle, through the Woggle moving through the land, and then there was a great flood, and then the furrows that his body created were filled up by the great flood, and then that created the rivers. And whereas science says looks at hydrology, and science says that through sediment movements and water movement through the land, that creates rivers. So this painting addresses this critical time where there were different ideologies coming together, and at this point it was actually an exchange of ideas, a harmonious exchange of ideas. And this is also showing this. Actually, the Minang people actually spent several days on board the astrolabe, and then the guys from the French guys from the astrolabe actually spent several days at camp in Minang camp. So, and at the end of their time, there was an exchange of goods, and they provided jewellery, shoes, and a mirror to the Minang people. And this shows us the man at the is astonished by his clear reflection in the mirror, as if some kind of new magic. And so this is part of that new exchange of ideas. And I did a painting in reference to that called Law of Reflection. And in the centre there it shows the law of reflection. There's a diagram there, the angle of reflection and the angle of incidence. And over the top is, I've used this a lot in my work, is the concentric circles. Concentric circles are an old Aboriginal icon, visual icon, to mean waterhole or campfire, or they could mean the Target shopping centre, or they could mean a Jasper Johns Target. For me, when I was growing up, I went to school in the 80s. I graduated in 1989, I think, in high school, and we learnt about the Heidelberg School, and we learnt about pop art, and we learned about modern art, and in particular Jasper Johns, and I loved his work. So at the time when I was growing up, that's what concentric circles meant to me, was Jasper Johns' Target. So I've used that icon a lot. This is a view of King George Sound by Louis de Sanson, and this is in 1826. they're shooting at some birds. There's a hunting dog there, and this is an interpretation of that, and showing the woggle in moving through the land and being shot. This is based on William John Huggins' work done in 1827, and he entitled it Swan River 50 Miles Up. I'm looking at Google Maps. I don't know if that was possible, 50 miles up the Swan River or the Derby Yerrigan, but to me it looks like the area, possibly an area around Guildford, and the positioning of the shadows in the sun to me, and the Stirling Ranges in the background. I'm thinking Middle Swan or Midland or something like that. This is part of the Captain Stirling's exploration party on the eastern bank. They're just embarking on the eastern bank of the Swan River or the Derby Yerrigan. And in the foreground there's several Wadjuk people, and they sit there as passive onlookers, and this is kind of playing into that whole idea of the noble savage, who is the man untouched by civilization, the purity of man, but also a man that doesn't have any social or political stance. Terra nullis, meaning land belonging to no one, that was part of the whole idea of no legal agreement needed to claim land. If the land was not owned by people, then it could be claimed. And so, and in fact, Noongar people were considered part of the flora and fauna by government for many years. On the 29th of September in 1829, the first land grants were opened, and then there was a larger series of land grants called the ribbon grants that were created in 1839, and they were initiated and basically given to families, and if they could get their each acre to be 1 shilling and 6pence worth, then they would get the title of the land. So that's how that worked. And if you were on the river as a Wadjuk person, you were, if you were there for worship or for waterfowl or turtle or whatever, or going for a food source, then you were trespassing and possibly shot. So this was, basically the beginning of tension between the Wadjuk people and the colony. This is a work by Robert Dale, and this is Fremantle in 1830. Excuse me. Robert Dale, he arrived on the HMS Sulphur in 1829, and he was a detachment of the 63rd Regiment under the command of Captain Frederick Irwin. And the detachment arrived as part of protection for the colony. Robert Dale was an explorer, and he was also a draftsman, and he became acting assistant to the Surveyor General John Septimus Roe. And he also took part in detailed expeditions of the Canning River, the York District, and also King George Sound. This is an interpretation of that work with, again, the 1826 Sir John Tenniel white rabbit, and in particular it's reference to chapter 2, which is called Down the Rabbit Hole, and this work's called Down the Rabbit Hole, and Down the Rabbit Hole has a line in it where it basically says Alice fell down the rabbit hole not realising how she was going to get out again, and I use that as kind of a metaphor for kind of what was happening at the time. Okay, this is Panoramic View of King George Sound by Robert Dale and Robert Havel. It's etching in aquatint, And at the time, it was pretty much one of the most ambitious prints to be done. It's almost 3 metres long. That's how big it is. And it was created from drawings that Robert Dale had done in the King George Sound area. It's called Panoramic View of King George Sound. And it shows gently undulating countryside, ripe for agricultural improvement, almost like a Garden of Eden. And it also shows harmonious relationship between the Minang people and the settlers. Yeah. A year before the print in 1833, Robert Dale actually acquired the head of Yagan, who was a prominent Noongar leader, Wajak leader, and he played a key role in early resistance in Perth against the British settlement and the surrounding areas. And he believed that the new settlement was impeding on traditional ways of life and traditional grounds. And private land ownership was taking away access to sacred areas and hunting areas. And so he played a key role in resistance to this. And after escalation in conflict and several deaths on both sides, he was captured and transferred to the Roundhouse in Fremantle. This is a picture of Fremantle in 1832. It's called the Roundhouse, and it was created by Wallace Bickley. It's another aquatint. It shows some of the islands and some odd islands out there. I'm not sure how they ended up there. Artistic license, I guess. Yagan was taken to Karnak Island and... I'll go back a bit. He was sentenced to death, but he was saved by a gentleman by the name of Robert Lyons. And Lyons' argument was that he was defending his land against invasion, so he should be on trial as a prisoner of war. And so Yagan was taken to Karnak Island. And Lyons actually spent many hours with Yagan, and he was learning the language and the customs. And Lyons wanted Yagan to cease hostilities between himself, his party, and the colony. And he believed he could do that. After several months, Yagan actually escaped on a dinghy, but the authorities did not pursue him. And in fact, in 1833, he returned to Perth and he actually performed several corroborees in Perth in 1833, a year later. On the 3rd of March, Yagan obtained permission to actually hold a corroboree in the post office gardens in Perth. The Perth Gazette wrote, Yagan was a master of ceremonies and acquitted himself with infinite grace and dignity, and he performed spear throwing demonstrations, and I'll go over to the next slide. This is an interpretation of the Roundhouse. Okay, this is a work that I did 72 panels on oil on panels. And this is called Panoramic View of Minang Budja. And it's there's also, over the top of that, is a contour map, which is representative of the topography of the land and Robert Dale's interpretation of the land. And in there is also a contour of Yagan's head on the left-hand side there. On the 19th of April, after breaking into a store in Fremantle to steal flour, caretaker Peter Chidlow and shot Domjum, which was Yagan's brother, and Yagan he died several days later in jail. and Yagan gathered a large party of Noongar men and ambushed a cart. And the Velvic brothers were killed in that incident, and then Yagan was declared an outlaw. In July of 1833, William and James Keats met Yagan, who were en route. They were en route to collect flour, and the brothers suggested that Yagan stay with them under protection because they knew that they were outlaws. But later that day, the brothers, Later that day, the brothers decided to, Brothers decided to kill Yagan to receive the reward, and Yagan was shot in the head, and he died shortly afterwards, and his body was skinned and beheaded. This is a work entitled Reaper. A short time later, Robert Dale obtained the head of Yagan. He took the head back to London. Yep. 5, yep. He took the head back to London, and he met a gentleman by the name of Thomas Pettigrew. He was a surgeon and an antiquarian, and he liked to collect things from Egypt and Africa all over the world. And he had a taste for antiquities and curiosities. He met Robert Dale, and Dale arranged for Thomas to have exclusive rights to Yagan's head, and Pettigrew held dinner parties and displayed Yagan's head, as well as a copy of the panoramic view of King George Sound next to it for his guests to take home as a souvenir. There were black cockatoo feathers placed in Yagan's head for aesthetic purposes. And I'll end on this one here called Souvenir. And it's just another interpretation of that Robert Dale work. And that's, I'll leave it there, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Great finish.
Well, actually, it wasn't finished. When Yagan's head was finally retrieved from the Everton Cemetery,
yes,
it had been buried with a Peruvian mummy and a Maori tattooed head.
Yes.
There's an exhibition, as you're aware, Unknown Land. Christopher has made it very clear that this was not an unknown land, and we thank him for that. Do we have any questions? We've got 5 minutes, yes.
Chris, thank you so much for that. It's lovely to see your work and to hear it explained. A great privilege. I wanted just to focus on one of the images, and it was the one of Woggle being shot.
Oh, yeah.
There was a paper by Kenneth Altman early in the day, which was about hunting.
Yes.
And I just want to report my naive thoughts when I was looking at this. I was thinking he might well hit the Woggle. Will the Woggle be killed? Surely not, because the Woggle is an almighty spiritual animal. But it brought to mind the whole process of your manipulation of older images, and it made me think that this, perhaps like the diagrams superimposed from different periods, are almost parallel universes that don't quite, a bullet's not going to quite hit that, or I don't know. But then other images in which Yagan's head is hovering over the landscape might be more like sort of spiritual emanations from the landscape, might be a more organic relationship with the image. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the modifications that you've made to these pictures and what different sorts of meaning they hold for you.
I just find the juxtaposition of different ideology in the one work intriguing. Yeah. And that's something in all my work I try to do is take ideology, two completely different ideology, and put them in the one work, because I want that confrontation or that that I find that really interesting. The juxtaposition it creates. It probably creates more questions than answers.
Yes.
It's not necessary. It's not what I'm painting is not an answer to anything, but maybe more raising questions about things rather than answering anything. And as with the wireframe head, I work with lines a lot, and that's also in reference to mathematics and this idea of interpretation of land through mathematics. Looking at land, in particular, obviously in that period of time, as not necessarily taking into account any spiritual value of land as a commodity, as an agricultural value, rather than seeing any spiritual or traditional value in land. And that's what I really like to explore and investigate. Yeah, is looking at different value on land, the ways people value land, and maybe how that's changed. And yeah. Yeah.
Further questions? I'll just ask one.
Yep.
Oh, no, we've got one down.
Well, like Richard, I thoroughly enjoyed. Oh, sorry, I thoroughly enjoyed hearing you talk about your work and its sources, and the skull rendered through the straight mathematical lines. I found very striking and striking because it departed from, and forgive me if I'm misinterpreting your work, but it seemed to depart from the stark contrast between one ideology of land and another, that other being the one that mathematicizes it, that surveys it, that maps it, that applies technologies to it. But here you have the remnants of a body of an indigenous person that's been rendered mathematically through a language of an imperial power. So I'm wondering, how is that different, and how does that register here? I mean, is it simply that the head has become a commodity in a system of exchange, social and economic exchange, or what is the force of the mathematical here in rendering the bodily remnant?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Yeah, is looking at that idea of as a commodity, looking at the whole history of how his head was sold as a commodity, as a curiosity, and valued as a curiosity, and then looking back on that history, and yeah, and it's also referencing that mathematics, but also the way I've hovered it over, I've used that as a tool, is maybe looking at it as a more spiritual thing. So something that's been lost but is still there in some form, in some way.
Am I wrong to be thinking of Damien Hirst skulls as well?
Always.
Always.
I saw that.
That didn't really come to mind, but yeah.
What about Gabriel Orozco, who's done Mexican artist, who's done heads like this? They're faceted.
Yeah.
In some cases, three-dimensional.
Yeah.
I immediately thought that was Orozco.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No. No. I actually did this through Adobe software. I actually created the skull through Adobe software, using lines and mathematics, geometry, basically. Yeah. So that's how it was created. But I just wanted to have it hovering, sitting over the landscape, to show this idea of something lost but still there in a sense, maybe in a spiritual sense.
One final question.
So my question is based on some other things I've heard today, and even the questions to you. Because for me, it's like you're making the European painting into an object by putting another object over the top. And so, going back to some of the other talks, this idea of, say, the other paper, the conflict of experience of time and place, and this idea of non-time and non-place, and I'm using a matrix of time and space. And so in a way, you're located in contemporary art practice. And so when we look at this and we see Damien Hirst, in fact I see Shane Cotton, I see Michael Parry-Corfai's rabbits, I see art from this region, and I see you within a contemporary practice that does have a relationship to American and European. And so in a way, I would like you just to talk about this lining and marking and objects and what people see when they look at you, look at that, look at themselves, who's looking, and where are the lines?
So that's all. And that will conclude the conference.
I don't know where to start with that.
Sorry, but it relates to Nick Thomas's writing, Bernard Smith's writing, Greg Denning's shoreline writing, Anne Salmon's Encounter, because I'm an Australian/New Zealander.
Yeah.
So that's my contemporary practice, but I know my European painting, I know my American art history.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm coming from,
Yeah.
and speaking directly to
Yeah.
you and your presentation.
Well, for me, it's, a lot of this imagery comes before there was even photography, and for me it was about, originally, research, and finding I'll tell you where it first came from. It was from trying to find Noongar iconography, visual iconography. Up north's lucky, they've still got a lot of the visual iconography that's left, but because of the perishable nature of it, there's very little visual Noongar iconography left. So I went to the Perth Museum, went down into their archives, looking at Codges and Kylie's, looking at old markings, looking at old photographs, old Daisy Bates photographs, looking at body markings, any iconography I could find. And part of that process is actually looking at old colonial artwork. Now, a lot of that's not necessarily accurate because there's a lot of artistic license in the work, but you can still get clues as to, little clues as to, old Noongar iconography, and that's originally where it come from. And you can't really understand where you're at as an individual, but also as a culture, unless you look back to your past and understand what actually happened in the past as well. So it's like it was a twofold process of understanding that history, my own family, my own personal family history, and the general history of particularly the Minang area, but also looking for that visual iconography, and this I guess is just a result of that. This work is basically a result of that. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
No worries.
Well, will you join me once again in